It's the middle of the Florida heat, somewhere behind a quiet corner of Walt Disney World, and there's a water park sitting there. Slides, pools, a sandy beach, except nobody's swum in it in over 2 decades. The paint is gone, the trees have taken over, and security guards patrol a fence line just to keep curious guests out of a place Disney once spent millions building and, for reasons that still get debated online today, simply chose to let rot. So today, we're diving into the rise and fall of Disney's River Country, a $20 million abandoned water park. The problem Disney didn't see coming. Walt Disney World opened in October of 1971, and for the first couple of years, everything about it seemed to be working exactly as planned. Guests showed up, spent money, rode the rides, and went home already planning their next trip. But by 1973, an entirely different kind of crisis was unfolding, one that had nothing to do with theme parks and everything to do with oil. The OPEC oil embargo sent gas prices climbing, and, more importantly for Disney, it made the average American family a lot more nervous about a long road trip to Central Florida. And in the 1970s, that's exactly how most people got there. Almost nobody was flying into Orlando for a Disney vacation the way they might today. They were driving, often from hundreds of miles away, and a gas shortage is a genuinely terrifying thing when your entire vacation depends on a full tank. Disney's answer wasn't to panic. It was to give people more reasons to stay once they'd already made the trip. If a family was going to spend the gas money and the time to get to Walt Disney World, Disney wanted them to stretch that visit out for as many days as possible instead of doing the parks in a weekend and leaving. The company had already been building out Fort Wilderness, the campground resort tucked along Bay Lake, as a lower-cost alternative to the hotels closer to the Magic Kingdom. It made sense then to give Fort Wilderness something nobody else had, not just a place to sleep, but a reason to stick around. That reason turned out to be water. Specifically, a water park unlike anything that had existed before it. It's worth noting that Fort Wilderness itself wasn't originally supposed to be the centerpiece of this expansion at all. According to David Koenig's book, Reality Land, which digs into a lot of this early Walt Disney World history, executives had at one point floated the idea of an enormous Wild West-themed village at Fort Wilderness, complete with its own restaurants and retail outlets. Disney actually got far enough into that plan to build Pioneer Hall, which still stands today and still hosts the long-running Hoop-Dee-Doo musical review dinner show. The rest of the sprawling Wild West village, though, never materialized. What Disney built instead, on a much smaller and more focused scale, was River Country, building the swimming hole. Here's the thing about River Country that gets lost pretty quickly once you start reading about brain-eating amoebas and abandoned slides. It was, by most measures, the first fully themed water park on the planet. Not the first water park, full stop. Wet attractions and public pools existed long before 1976, but a water park with an actual story, an actual visual identity, built the way Disney built everything else, that was new. The working title during development was Pop's Willow Grove, which sounds more like the name of a regional grocery chain than a Disney attraction, and it's probably for the best that they went in a different direction. What they landed on instead was an idea straight out of Mark Twain. River Country was designed to look and feel like an old-fashioned swimming hole, the kind of rustic, sun-dappled spot you'd imagine Tom Sawyer or Huckleberry Finn cannonballing into on a summer afternoon. Sandy paths instead of pavement, man-made boulders, rope swings, wooden docks. It leaned hard into a nostalgic, almost rural Americana look, which was a strange but oddly perfect contrast to the futuristic, high-gloss identity Disney was building everywhere else on property. The location mattered just as much as the theming. Disney built River Country directly on the shore of Bay Lake, and rather than trucking in and treating an entirely separate supply of water, engineers designed a system that filtered lake water directly into the park. It was, at the time, presented as a clever bit of environmental efficiency. Use what's already there, filter it, and create something that looks and feels like a natural swimming hole because, functionally, a good chunk of it actually was one. It's a detail that sounds charming in the marketing copy and considerably less charming once you get to the part of this story involving amoebas. But we'll get there. Reports on what exactly Disney spent building River Country vary depending on which corner of the internet you land on, but the figure that gets repeated most often lands somewhere around $20 million, a serious investment for what was, relative to the parks it would eventually compete against, a fairly modest footprint. It wasn't small, it just wasn't massive either, which is a distinction that becomes very relevant later in this story. Disney was also, by most accounts, genuinely cautious about how big to build the thing in the first place. This was an entirely new category of attraction for the company, and nobody at Imagineering had a reliable way to predict whether guests would actually treat a themed water park as a destination worth paying extra for, or as a novelty they'd try once and skip on future visits. That uncertainty is a big part of why River Country ended up roughly a quarter of the size of Typhoon Lagoon, the water park Disney would build 13 years later once it had the benefit of actual attendance data to justify a much bigger investment. Opening day, 1976. River Country opened its gates on June 20th, 1976, and Disney did not treat it like a minor addition. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was officiated by Susan Ford, daughter of then-President Gerald Ford, which tells you something about how seriously Disney wanted this thing to be taken. More than 700 reporters and their families showed up for the opening festivities, and Disney had commemorative coins and merchandise made specifically for the occasion, most of which reportedly sold out almost immediately. Admission was $4 a person. Adjusted for inflation, that's somewhere in the neighborhood of $17 or $18 today, which, if you've bought a bottle of water at a Disney park recently, might make you feel a genuine physical kind of grief. Guests entering River Country walked through a wooden gate flanked by lanterns and rope fencing, immediately setting the tone before they'd even gotten wet. Inside, the park centered around two main areas. The first was Upstream Plunge, a chlorinated kidney-shaped swimming pool fed by slippery slide falls, a pair of 16-foot chutes that dropped riders 7 feet into the water below. The second, and honestly the more memorable of the two, was Bay Cove, a half-acre sand-bottomed lake pulled directly from Bay Lake itself, complete with a cable ride, a tire swing, and a boom swing that let guests fling themselves into the water like they were auditioning for a rural summer camp brochure. Then there was Whoopin' Holler Hollow, a pair of twisting water slides, one measuring 260 feet and the other 160 feet, both emptying guests into what Disney simply called the Ol' Swimmin' Hole. It's a name that is aged either wonderfully or terribly depending entirely on your tolerance for whimsy. Beyond the marquee attractions, River Country had a wading pool for younger kids, a nature trail winding through the surrounding woods, and Pop's Place, a small quick-service spot for guests who'd worked up an appetite from all the swinging and sliding. None of it was flashy in the way water parks would become just a decade or two later. It didn't need to be. In 1976, this was genuinely revolutionary. Getting to the park was its own small adventure, too. Guests staying at Fort Wilderness often rode the campground's own railroad to reach River Country, a 4/5 scale train line that had opened a few years earlier and became noticeably busier once the water park gave people an actual destination to ride toward. During peak hours, Disney sometimes ran 4 trains at once just to keep up with demand, a detail that says a lot about how quickly River Country embedded itself into the daily rhythm of a Fort Wilderness vacation. The golden years. For the better part of 2 decades, River Country did exactly what Disney built it to do. It gave people a reason to stay longer, it filled up Fort Wilderness, and it became a legitimate part of the Walt Disney World identity rather than a side attraction nobody talked about. Over the course of its roughly 25-year run, the park averaged close to 4,000 guests a day, and it frequently hit capacity during peak season, to the point where Disney occasionally had to turn people away at the gate. It even got a moment in the pop culture spotlight. In 1977, River Country was featured in a musical segment on The Wonderful World of Disney, in an episode called The Mouseketeers at Walt Disney World, complete with an original song showing off the park's late 70s cast of Mouseketeers enjoying the attractions. It's the kind of promotional appearance that, in hindsight, feels almost quaint, a sign of just how central this little rustic water park was to Disney's broader identity at the time. River Country was, by every reasonable measure, a hit, which makes what happened to it over the following 2 decades a little harder to explain with a single, tidy reason. Because the truth is, there wasn't just one reason. There were several, stacked on top of each other, each one chipping away a little more at a park that had once been genuinely groundbreaking. For most of the late 1970s and into the 1980s, River Country didn't really have to worry about any of that. It essentially had no direct competition anywhere in the region, let alone within Walt Disney World itself. Guests who wanted a full day of water-based fun in Central Florida had exactly one obvious option: and it happened to come with Mickey Mouse's name attached to it. That kind of uncontested run doesn't last forever in any business. And it certainly wasn't going to last forever at a resort that was actively adding new attractions every few years. The darker chapter. Let's address the part of this story that tends to dominate the comment sections whenever river country comes up, because it's both real and, according to most people who've actually researched it carefully, considerably less central to the park's downfall than internet legend suggests. In August of 1980, an 11-year-old boy from New York died after contracting primary amoebic meningoencephalitis, a rare and almost always fatal infection caused by Naegleria fowleri, commonly nicknamed the brain-eating amoeba. It's found naturally in warm freshwater lakes and rivers throughout the southern United States, and because river country drew its water directly from Bay Lake, the infection was linked to the park. He wasn't an isolated case that year either. Health officials in Florida recorded a total of 4 amoeba-related deaths across the state that same summer, in bodies of water that had nothing to do with Disney. The boy's family sued the Walt Disney Company, though officials from the state health department pointed out at the time that these infections occur with some regularity in warm freshwater lakes generally, and that there wasn't a clear reason to single out river country's filtration system as the cause. Over the following decade, 2 more tragic deaths occurred at the park, both accidental drownings unrelated to the amoeba case. None of this is pleasant to talk about, and none of it should be brushed past. But here's the part that tends to get lost in the retelling. The amoeba death happened in 1980. River country didn't close until 2001. That's a 21-year gap, during which millions of guests continued to visit the park without incident. If a single infection from 2 decades earlier were genuinely the reason Disney pulled the plug, it's a strange thing to wait that long to act on. The rumor persists anyway, in the way these things tend to. Blogs and forum posts dedicated to abandoned places have kept the brain-eating amoeba story alive for years, often presenting it as the definitive reason behind the closure. It makes for a better story, admittedly. A slow, boring death by declining attendance numbers just doesn't spread the same way on the internet as a chilling tale about a parasite lurking in Disney's water. But boring is, more often than not, what actually happened. There's also a related rumor worth clearing up while we're here, since it tends to travel alongside the amoeba story. The idea that Florida passed a new law sometime around 2001 banning water parks from using natural bodies of water, effectively forcing river country to close overnight. It's a tidy explanation, and it shows up in more than a few articles and blog posts about the park. Disney historians who've actually dug through the record on this, though, have generally found no such law on the books at the time. Like the amoeba theory, it's a story that fits neatly into the mystery surrounding river country's closure, which is probably exactly why it keeps circulating, regardless of whether it actually happened. The competition shows up. If there's one factor that genuinely explains river country's decline, it's this. Disney built something better, and then built it again, each time directly undercutting the park that came before. In 1989, Disney opened Typhoon Lagoon, a water park roughly 4 times the size of river country, with more parking, more slides, and a much more elaborate theme built around a fictional typhoon-ravaged tropical island. It had a wave pool that could produce 6-foot swells. It had a water coaster. It had, in essentially every measurable way, more of everything river country offered, dressed up with a bigger budget and a decade and a half of additional water park engineering behind it. Then, in 1995, Disney did it again. Blizzard Beach opened with an entirely different gimmick, a ski resort that had supposedly melted under the Florida sun, complete with chairlifts repurposed as ride queues and a towering summit slide that, at the time, was billed as one of the tallest and fastest water slides in the world. River country, by comparison, started to look exactly like what it was, a product of 1976, standing next to 2 parks built with the benefit of everything Disney had learned since. It wasn't that river country got worse. It stayed almost exactly the same. Everything around it simply got bigger, faster, and more thrilling, and attendance began sliding in a much more literal and much less fun way than any of the park's actual water slides. There's also a simpler explanation buried in there that's easy to overlook. Guests only have so many vacation days, and only so much appetite for spending an entire afternoon getting wet. Once Disney had 2 much larger water parks competing for that same limited slice of a guest's itinerary, river country wasn't really competing against outside theme parks anymore. It was competing against its own siblings for the same finite pool of guests, on the same property, under the same corporate roof. That's an uncomfortable position for any attraction to be in, and it's one River Country never really found a way out of. There's a quote attributed to a Disney World spokesman, Bill Warren, from an April 2002 Orlando Sentinel report that captures the company's posture toward the park pretty well by that point. Asked whether River Country might reopen, Warren said it could, but only if there was, in his words, enough guest demand. It's the kind of non-committal answer that tells you almost everything you need to know about where a business's priorities actually sit. The quiet closure of 2001. River Country closed its doors on November 2, 2001, at the end of that year's operating season, exactly the way it did every single winter for its annual refurbishment. Nobody made an announcement. Nobody framed it as historic. It was just supposed to be routine maintenance before reopening the following spring. The same routine the park had followed for 25 years, except spring 2002 came and went, and River Country never reopened. Disney stayed quiet on the subject for months, offering no real explanation, until eventually confirming that the park would remain closed for the rest of that year. That non-answer stretched into 2003, then into 2004. And it wasn't until January of 2005, more than 3 years after that last operating day, that Disney finally made it official. River Country was closed permanently. The timing here matters, because 2001 wasn't just the year River Country happened to be limping along on declining attendance. It's also the year of the September 11th terrorist attacks, which triggered an immediate and dramatic collapse in domestic travel and tourism across the entire country. Walt Disney World, a destination that depends almost entirely on discretionary travel spending, felt that collapse hard. In the aftermath, the company made sweeping cuts across the resort to match a sudden, severe drop in demand. A struggling, aging water park that was already the least profitable of Disney's 3 water parks made for an obvious and painless place to start cutting. So the actual explanation for River Country's closure ends up being almost anticlimactic. It wasn't a single scandal, a single lawsuit, or a single deadly amoeba. It was old infrastructure, newer and flashier competition literally a few miles down the road, and a national tourism crisis that hit at exactly the wrong moment. Disney didn't need to announce a dramatic ending because there wasn't one. The park just quietly stopped opening back up. 17 years of rot. Here's where River Country's story takes its strangest turn. And it's the part that genuinely doesn't fit the way Disney typically operates. When Disney is done with something, it tends to disappear fast. Attractions get demolished or replaced within a year or two, sometimes within months. River Country did none of that. Instead, Disney fenced it off, left the lights on an automatic timer that kept flipping on and off for years with nobody watching, and walked away. Signs went up around the perimeter reading, simply, "Sorry, River Country is closed." Security cameras and patrols kept an eye on the property, and trespassers caught wandering in risked getting banned from the entire resort. And yet, for the better part of 2 decades, that's exactly what people did. Urban explorers climbed the green perimeter fence or slipped in through backstage service roads, documenting a park slowly being swallowed by the Florida landscape. Slides collapsed under vines. Pools turned green and stagnant. Paint peeled off structures that had once hosted 700 journalists on opening day. The site became something of a minor legend in the urban exploration community. Photographer Seth Lawless documented the decay extensively, capturing images that spread widely online and, according to some reporting, led to legal pushback from Disney once the photos started circulating in books and articles. It's a genuinely strange position for a company as image-conscious as Disney to find itself in, actively trying to keep a rotting, abandoned version of its own former attraction out of public view, while doing nothing to actually remove it. Nearby Discovery Island, Disney's small zoological island attraction just across Bay Lake, had closed even earlier, in 1999, and shared a similarly eerie, untouched fate for years. Between the two of them, River Country and Discovery Island became a kind of open secret at Walt Disney World, visible in glimpses from the ferry boats running between the Magic Kingdom and Fort Wilderness, decaying in plain sight while millions of guests rode past without necessarily realizing what they were looking at. In fact, of every Disney attraction ever built at Walt Disney World, these two remain the only ones the company has ever closed permanently without eventually replacing them with something new, which is part of why both sites became such magnets for curiosity in the years that followed. Demolition and the resort that never came. Disney finally started actually doing something with the site in 2016, beginning with draining and filling in the old upstream plunge pool. It was a slow start to what would eventually become a full demolition, but it was, at least, a start. Over the following 2 years, crews continued clearing away what remained of the old park, and in May of 2018, Disney officially confirmed plans for a new development on the site. That development had a name: Reflections, a Disney lakeside lodge. It was pitched as a nature-themed Disney Vacation Club resort with roughly 900 rooms and villas, standalone cabins similar to those at Disney's Wilderness Lodge, and theming built around classic Disney animated films with a distinctly woodland flavor: Bambi, Brother Bear, The Fox and the Hound, and Pocahontas among them. A later announcement, made at the 2019 D23 Expo, added a lakeside restaurant themed around the Princess and the Frog. On paper, it sounded like exactly the kind of respectful, thoughtful send-off River Country's site probably deserved after everything it had been through. By April of 2019, demolition crews had cleared away most of what remained of the original park, including the last visible remnants of the upstream plunge pool. Permits were filed. A footprint was laid out. Construction appeared to be moving forward on schedule, with an opening initially targeted for 2022. And then, in early 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic hit, and virtually every major construction project at Walt Disney World came to an abrupt stop, Reflections included. Unlike most of the resort's operations, though, work on Reflections simply never resumed. By April of 2021, Disney had filed a permit not to continue construction, but to remove office trailers from the property, a fairly clear signal to longtime Disney watchers that the project had quietly died. On March 15, 2022, Disney confirmed as much, formally announcing that plans for Reflections had been canceled in favor of a new Disney Vacation Club tower being added at the Polynesian Village Resort instead. For a few years after that, the former River Country site sat mostly untouched again, cleared but unbuilt, a flattened patch of land where an entire theme park once stood. Permits kept quietly cycling through Disney's development pipeline in 2023 and 2024, and by 2025, aerial photos finally showed real construction activity underway on site, including equipment large enough to require its own Federal Aviation Administration clearance. More recently, Disney has revived plans for the site under yet another name, Disney's Lakeshore Lodge, a project positioned as roughly the 16th Disney Vacation Club resort, with construction reportedly progressing toward a targeted opening later this decade. Whether that timeline holds is, at this point, something longtime Disney fans have learned to treat with a healthy dose of skepticism, given the site's history of announcements that don't quite pan out on schedule. In the meantime, small pieces of River Country never actually disappeared. The park's original entrance gate was repurposed for years as the entryway to Mickey's Backyard BBQ, a dinner show at Fort Wilderness, and the old main service building was converted into public restrooms for guests attending that same event. It's a strangely fitting little postscript. Long after the water park itself was gone, guests were still, in a small and mostly unnoticed way, walking through pieces of it. Why this one sticks with people. Plenty of attractions have closed at Walt Disney World over the decades. Most of them get quietly replaced, and within a year or two, most guests forget they were ever there in the first place. River Country stuck around as a visible, decaying reminder for far longer than that, which is probably exactly why it's become such a fixture of Disney urban legend and nostalgia in equal measure. It wasn't killed by scandal, even though the amoeba story will probably keep circulating online forever because it's simply more compelling than the truth. It wasn't killed by a single bad decision, either. It was worn down gradually, first by newer and flashier siblings built by the same company, and then finished off by a national tragedy that had nothing to do with water parks at all. What's left behind is a strange, quiet case study in what happens when a beloved place simply becomes inconvenient to keep running. And then, for reasons that still aren't entirely clear, inconvenient to tear down for almost 2 decades afterward. If you grew up visiting Walt Disney World in the 70s, 80s, or 90s, there's a decent chance River Country is tucked somewhere in your memory, whether you remember the name or not. That old rope swing, the sandy-bottomed lake, a $4 ticket that, looking back, feels almost impossible to believe. And there's something almost fitting about the fact that a company built entirely around control, precision, and carefully managed storytelling ended up losing control of the narrative around one of its own attractions for the better part of 2 decades. Disney didn't plan for River Country to become an urban exploration landmark. It didn't plan for photographers to sneak past the fence line and turn its decay into a small, strange corner of internet folklore. It just happened, quietly, while the company's attention was pointed at bigger and shinier things down the road. Sometimes the most interesting version of a Disney story isn't the one Disney meant to tell. If you enjoyed learning about this piece of Disney history, give this video a like and subscribe for more stories about the abandoned, forgotten, and quietly retired corners of the theme park world. There are more of them out there than you'd probably expect.